Why did you decide to join Labor instead of the Greens?
I'd had a long association with Labor in the past. People sometimes get it a bit confused. They think that when I was the president of the Australian Conservation Foundation, I was actually in the Green Party. But the ACF is a non-government organisation, and I worked with them for a number of years on lots of different environment issues. And we got some really good things done at that time. But when I decided to move into formal politics, I chose Labor. I'd had an association that went back some time. And there was something about the values set of a party that was talking not only about issues that were important to me, like environment, and had done some really good things in the past, but could do more, and its willingness and wanting to make sure that people everywhere were given a decent opportunity at jobs, at education, and so on. That rang a bell. I was a Gough Whitlam fan. Gough meant a great deal to me. And even though I had a lot of friends and people I'd worked with in the Greens, I felt that it better suited me to be in the Labor Party, and if we got to government, hopefully to get some good things done.
Do you think you were instrumental in changing things after you joined the Labor Party, or do you think you did more while you were independent?
Well, it's really interesting because I read David Brooks writing about this in the New York Times, and he talks about a different sort of way in which nowadays we look at culture. We look at institutions and we're quite distrustful of them, and we expect the worst of them, and we think about our own perspective on things, but there's not as much balance perhaps as there could be. So I've put a list of things up on my website that I'm proud of, that I did with Labor Party members, with other colleagues when we were in government. And each one of those things, if it was the only thing I got done in 6 years in government, I would have considered it worthwhile, if you like, to have taken that step. But there were many more. And I think that outside the Parliament, I did other things, as other people do. So it's not either or, it's not one or the other. I've done both. Both have got their challenges. But doing both can also provide, hopefully, some decent results.
What was something that surprised you when you became an MP?
I guess one of the things that surprised me was the fact that quite a lot of people in the Parliament didn't know that much about music. I should have guessed that, I suppose. But and there were others who were really knowledgeable and loved their music. And it was kind of interesting because the Parliament's no different from a hotel or a club or a street or a classroom. It's made up of all kinds of different people. But that was a little bit surprising. And I think the other thing, how much more driven by clocks and time the process was. And it kind of has to be because it's government, it's a big thing. You need to keep it moving reasonably efficiently. But as someone who hadn't paid much attention to time in the past, it was a bit of a wake-up call, if you'll excuse the pun.
When you were a sitting member of Parliament, what did you consider to be the most satisfying thing you did?
Well, for me, one of the most satisfying things was representing people. And my electorate was in Sydney. It was called Kingsford Smith. And it ran through the southeastern suburbs, down the coast towards Botany Bay, where the airport is. And it was a very diverse electorate with lots of different people in it. Aboriginal people living down in the La Perouse suburb, professional sportsmen and people from advertising industries and media in some of the northern suburbs, lots of families, immigrants. I mean, just a fantastic electorate. So connecting with people and trying to represent them well was the thing which really meant something to me as a Member of Parliament.
What are your thoughts on the government trying to close remote Indigenous communities? What could we do as a nation to keep the communities open and viable?
I'm pretty suspicious about the plans to close these communities, and I do know that in some places there are really tiny communities which have got quite a lot of infrastructure, and because a lot of people in that area, Aboriginal people, may move from one community to another depending on family ties, then it's a legitimate question for governments to ask themselves about resourcing, but only in as much as if this is where people are choosing to live, if it's their country, if it's where their kids are going to school, then it doesn't matter whether it's 20 or 30 or 40 people or 500 people. You just can't pull people off their country that way, and I'm terribly concerned that if thoughtless closures go ahead of this kind, then people will drift into town and away from their connections to other family members, and find that being in town is pretty difficult for them.
Why do we currently seem to lack politicians on either side of politics who have a passionate big picture vision for Australia's future? Can you help bring forward future leaders?
Thanks very much, Jessica, for asking this really good question. And I think some people do have a big vision, and I write about it in the book. I had some really big things that I thought we should be pursuing, and some of those I had a chance to have a bit of a go at, and others you just don't have the time for once you're in government. And I know when you read the speeches of people when they first go in there, that they quite often are about the big picture, but they very quickly get subsumed by the day-to-day. And we need to lift our eyes off the here and now a little bit, and we need to come away from some of the picky, trying to sort of put the pin in the dial of people way of thinking and observing that's pretty common in social media sometimes. I know it's quite often people who are narky who go onto social media, but it's a little wearisome. And also, you'll never get them. It's not a media bash. They have their go at me, and sometimes you can understand why, but you never really read or see the positive, the good things that are happening, the good work that people are doing, whether it's in or out of politics. So I do think we need to recognise that there are two things happening in the world. Yeah, people are getting some things wrong and we've got problems, but also people are getting some things right and they're trying to fix them. And unless you know that second thing's going on, it's pretty easy to get disheartened. When it comes to young leaders, I think it's important to mentor young people. I'm stunned by young people that I meet who are out and about, getting active, whatever they're doing. The energy of young people is, it's just amazing, and I just think it's encouraging people, mentoring them where you have that opportunity, and letting them know that anything's possible.
Were you taken seriously when you entered politics? How did you approach the doubters?
I didn't approach the doubters, and look, as far as I'm concerned, I was taken seriously. I'd been into the parliament a lot when I was ACF president. I knew some of the people who were in there. I'd worked with people like Prime Minister Hawke and his office during a period of big environmental gains. But the one thing I did do when I went in was I started at the bottom again. So I started as a backbencher. I didn't have any formal position or shadow ministerial responsibilities. And I just hoped that by my efforts, I might be able to work my way through.
How did you manage the balance between maintaining your personal integrity and working as a politician? What tips would you give to anyone who's thinking of trying to have a positive influence on public policy?
Helen, it's such a good question. And I think one of the difficult things for people to grasp is that you don't lose all your values simply because you become a politician. In fact, you take your values to a place where you think they can make a difference. But in a political party, there are going to be policies that sometimes don't exactly match where your head or your heart is at. And you accept being a team player. And if you want to change those policies or oppose them, then you do that. But you do it behind closed doors. You don't do it in the full glare of the media, who, of course, would immediately say division in the ranks and, etc., etc. So I think you've got to hold on to what your values are and understand that you're trying to do something for the greater good. Making the judgment about that isn't always easy, but if you feel that you're doing that, then it's worthwhile. And for people who are considering it, you're going to have to grow a couple of skins because you'll be subject to a lot of criticism, and you're in a conflict-ridden environment, which most of us don't occupy, which is you've always got your opposite number trying to cut you down to size or make a point or criticise you. And that's part of the robust debate that goes with politics. I'm not saying that shouldn't happen. I'm just saying you need to be prepared for it.
The next question is from Hunters and Collectors, Mark Seymour.
Hi, Peter. Well, this latest Senate report presents a scathing assessment of conditions in the detention centre on the island of Nauru. There have been 3 reports in the last 2 years, and all of them depict the same appalling picture of trauma, mental illness in children, sexual abuse, physical assault, and other crimes against children. So, Peter, if you were still in office, what would you do about this?
Thank you, Mark, for a very deeply thought question. And the answer is object to it. And you're right, it's in recent times particularly that we've now learnt more about what's happening in places like Nauru. And I noticed even today a young Labor Party Member of Parliament starting to speak out about it. And I would support her and speak out about it too. I think one of the most difficult things about the refugee issue generally, and where Australians have been on it, has been this very question. The balance of security against humanitarian concerns, and at the moment, particularly in those reports that you quite rightly point to, humanitarian concerns need very much to be taken into account.
In Old Men, the ageing protagonist, Sheriff Bell, retires because he feels overmatched in the face of the world's growing brutality. Is that how politics felt for you?
In a word, no. I had my eyes open when I became a politician. I've got the media saying I was talking off my talking points today. Not quite true, but never mind. The fact is that as I've launched Big Blue Sky, I've also said I thought it was a privilege to serve at the high levels of government in this country, a country that I love and I've always wanted to do something for. And politics is a tough game. It's probably one of the toughest in town, but that's not the point. People who go into it know that. And if you go in with a really strong sense to try and do the best that you can, and you get that opportunity finally to sit in that office and make those decisions, then it's a gift that comes from the people. And so the brutality of interplay and leadership challenges ultimately is minor beer compared with the sorts of things you can do when you're in government.
Are you disillusioned with politics in the way one has to compromise or abandon one's core values to be selected or endorsed?
Look, we've got quite a few questions like this. I think I've had a go at answering it before. The answer is no. And there are parts of politics that are disillusioning. Of course there are, and you see it every day. But politics generally, no, I'm not, and I don't think we should be. I think we need to influence and infect our political institutions with lots of young people, with lots of people who've got ideals and want to get things happening. I think there's a very strong argument for some big reform in the party that I'm a member of and served in government, the Labor Party. You can't have the unions really effectively dominating the outcome at things like the National Conference. You need to have a much more democratic way of starting to bring policy through, where it's approved and discussed by the members, and then the party gives effect to it. But politics has always been played by humans since the beginning of time. The current system we've got, to paraphrase Churchill and 1,000 other people, is not perfect, but it's the best one we've got. We should continue to try and improve it, but we shouldn't walk away from it or shake our heads and think that there is no possibilities with it.
Ready? We're recording. Hello, Peter. I hope this finds you well. I'm here in Hamburg, and I'm thinking of this question for you. It's a tricky one. Tricky one for me to put into words. When you joined the Labour Party, I saw it as a really brave and selfless act, because you must have been aware of a compromise that was coming with that after working with NGOs and more hardline activist organizations, that working with the Labour Party was going to be such a compromise. But I saw that you were making that move for the greater good, that you were willing get the king. And I was just wondering how you dealt with that pressure from, I guess, a lot of old colleagues and the environmental movement itself, that the judgment that you would have sold out. As I said, I saw it as an amazingly selfless and brave thing to do, and I think, you know, I think I know why you did it. But I just want to know how you dealt with that. You know, after having your heart so entrenched and putting so much hard work into that world, and then having a part of that world come back at you and judge you, it must have been really hard. Amongst all the other things that were going on in the Labour Party and in your own life, to have old friends and colleagues maybe judge you. I just wonder how you dealt with that, and what got you through, and what keeps you strong. Lots of love.
Hey, lots of love back, John Butler. I was just talking about you. There's a big difference between the Green Party and conservation organisations and environment groups. And I had a really good relationship with nearly all the environment groups when I was Environment Minister. And I got a lot of positive feedback from them because we got a lot of things done. The Greens were particularly strong in their attack, and I thought sometimes a little bit over the top. And some of those people I knew well. But they weren't the conservation organisations. And I look at the stuff that I've just put up on the website now to provide people with a bit of an idea of what was going on. When I wrote Big Blue Sky, I didn't want to have a long list of, you know, this is what I did, therefore, you know, my decision was a good one. I didn't want to write a memoir like that. But I have put that list of things up so that people do actually see the facts. And I look at the way in which we initiated caring for our country and increased the spending on protecting national parks and Indigenous protected areas. I look at taking the Japanese to the International Court of Justice on whaling, the only second time in the last 50 years that we've been into that court, and we won that case. All the money that we invested on an alternative model for how we might look after whales and dolphins in the International Whaling Commission. I look at what we did establishing the work, which was continued by my successor, Tony Burke, to get fantastic marine reserves up and underway around Australia. The Coral Sea Conservation Zone, you know, nearly 1 million square kilometres declared. I look at the rollout of solar panels on a scale that never ever happened before with Howard and that crowd. I look at a whole heap of smaller decisions, some to do with stopping things like the Traverson Dam, others to do with actually reinstating the grants program for those conservation organisations that I felt was appropriate. And I also look at the letters that I got from people like the Queensland Conservation Council thanking me for my time as Minister. So, I mean, it sounds a little bit like me, I, but as an Environment Minister, I knew that issue very well, and I got a lot of really positive things done. I would have loved to have done more, but I certainly didn't feel conflicted or compromised about that at all. In fact, I was glad I had that opportunity. John, I say to you, Ningaloo, you know, World Heritage listed at last, and the Kimberley on the National Heritage List too, and a planning process that hopefully limits the kind of impacts that big developments can have there. How did I come through the other end, still kind of smiling and sitting here and saying all this to you? Working with people, working with others, listening carefully to what people said. I always thought the job of being in this office was about working with the groups that you were there to represent. And I felt that we did that as well as we could. And so I had a bit of bounce in my feet when I left that office.
Do you think you were able to make a more powerful contribution to the community as a musician or in your life as an official politician?
Well, this is another good question, Jess. Look, they're different and other people make those calls. I think that many conservationists and many people in non-government organisations spend a lot of time trying to knock on the door and get into Canberra and speak to governments and people who are in power there. My door was always open to people and I listened to them, and where we could, we tried to do positive things within the policy frame of the government for them. So I've just listed a whole bunch of stuff in answer to, I think, a question from John. but they're different roles and different positions. And for me, I got the opportunity to do both. And for that, I'm particularly thankful.
If you could, what one thing would you do differently?
I'd probably explain myself a bit more. I think that, in fact, some of these questions are pretty good examples that if you let other people tell your story at different times, then that's what everybody ends up thinking. And I really had my head down when I was in politics. Every time I popped my head up, it felt like someone was going to have a go at it, or it might be misinterpreted, or as a very high profile candidate or a celebrity candidate, you're always going to attract a bit more attention as you go. And instead of managing all of that and sort of getting caught up in it, I made a decision just to really knuckle down and sort of roll up the sleeves and get into the trenches on stuff like policy, which is the kind of word which makes everybody watching this book launch, online book launch, go to sleep. But it's really the thing that makes a difference. And I got across that policy stuff and really tried to get on with doing it as well as I could. But others got a chance to tell the Peter Garrett story for a while, and they didn't tell the true story. So I probably should have been out there a bit more. That's partly why I've written this book.
Hey, we're Skipping Girl Vinegar, and we've got a couple of questions for you. Amen.
Hi, Peter. Do you think you had more positive political influence as a politician or as a musician?
And why?
Well, here's another band.
And Peter, I was wondering, when you were in politics with the Labor Party, what were your most helpful creative outlets?
Hey, Peter, after all of your extensive touring, both in Australia and particularly overseas, what would you do differently if you were to do it again from, I guess, the hindsight of doing so much, or what would you repeat the same? All right, see you later. Good luck with the book. All the best.
Wow. Well, the Skipping Girl Vinegars, who I saw a while back and continue to grow and go from strength to strength, have asked quite a few questions. And I think the first one is horses for courses. If you can go in and work in a company or in politics, in a community group, and feel like you're having a crack, go and do it. I think that if it comes to issues around which one's more important or otherwise, it's whatever drives you, wherever you get driven to be. Bands get driven to perform and create, and they end up on stage. But people who are activists end up in activist organisations. Those who want to exercise power gravitate to politics. Hopefully you take your values with you when you do that. On the question of the creative outlets, well, I didn't have many when I was in the Parliament. I found that quite a difficult thing. I found that it was a little bit like kind of a room without any furniture in it, and there was nowhere to sit. So you just kept on walking and kept on talking. And so certainly coming out of the Parliament has meant that I've been reconnecting with music, and that has been a wonderful thing to do. Final question about the road and what we would have done differently. I think for any young band, the thing to do is to get away quick. You might not have much money, you might get homesick, it might test you because you haven't kind of been together for that long period of time in another country, in a strange place with the strange food and all that. But if you get away quick, you make friends, you come back, and it gets easier.
Hi Peter, congratulations on the book. My question to you is, you have to spend 6 months in a leaky boat with either Tony Abbott or Kevin Rudd. Who's it going to be and why?
I really love Paul Dempsey, and this last question is funny and also very challenging to answer. Well, despite what I've said about both of these leaders in Big Blue Sky, I can't jump out of the boat, I'm guessing is the base point for the question. I have to stay in there. So I've got to convince them about certain things. Abbott, that'd be hard. He had and has had years and years to come to grips with the environment, to come to grips with compassion in human rights, to come to grips with a view which isn't simply reactive, and sees everybody else as the opposition and the enemy. There's a reason that Mr Abbott was a terrific opposition leader. I think he thought in those terms. And so I guess if I was in the leaky boat, I'd say, well, Tony, we've actually got to row together. Whether you got the budgie smugglers on or not, or me as well, let's just have a crack at it and see where we end up. With Mr Rudd, I had my criticisms of him as well. At the same time, he was a Labor leader of Labor governments that got a lot of things done, and a lot of good things, a lot of things that I think people like myself and others who were members of the government and who were ministers are probably proud of. We're not being false and sticking out our chests around it. We got some good things done for the country. Didn't agree with the leadership and strongly supported Julia Gillard in her Prime Ministership. But I guess I'd be saying, well, look what can happen when you row together, when you work together. And why are we here? Why are we in the boat? It's not necessarily because we want to be the one deciding exactly which direction to go in. It's because we believe that the country and the people that we represent need to be in that better place on that faraway shore. So that would be something like my discussion, I guess. That is, if I didn't have a snorkel, goggles, or an oxygen tank with me.